Hi, so good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this CVNet.be webinar on the European TEN-T regulations and their impact on local mobility policy. Before we dive into this topic, let me first briefly introduce myself and the organization I work for. My name is Merten de Kinderen. I'm a communication manager at Mobiel 21. With me is also my colleague Elke Francois, who is a project leader for a variety of sustainable mobility projects, and she's joining us today. Our organization, Mobiel 21, is a Flemish nonprofit, and we set people in motion towards more sustainable, more active modes of transport. As part of our activities, we actively build bridges between citizens and policymakers, for example, through participation and co-creation processes, as well as citizen science campaigns. We also build bridges between different levels of government. Through knowledge sharing and capacity building, we connect local governments with each other and with the regional, national, and the European level. One way of doing so is through CVNet.be. This is an open learning network within the European Civitas initiative, and it brings together local policymakers from Brussels, Flanders, and Wallonia to help them get a better picture of what's going on the European level. So in other words, CVNet.be brings Europe to your town hall or your village square. For example, by hosting this webinar on the Trans-European Transport Network. To guide us through the TEN-T regulations and tell us what they mean for local policymakers, we have speakers from both Flanders and Wallonia in store for you today. This includes Pim Bonne and Kathleen Huet from the Department of Mobility and Public Works from the Flemish government, as well as Thomas Richard from the Service Public de Wallonie, or SPW. Both will give a presentation about TEN-T, and then afterwards we'll open up the floor for questions from the audience. If you already have a question during the presentations, feel free to put it in the chat and we will pick it up afterwards. So that's my short introduction. I think we can get started. So I'll close my screen and ask you, Pim, to share your presentation and maybe introduce yourself a bit more in a few sentences if you could.
Yes. Okay, I hope you all see the presentation well.
Perfect.
Okay, good afternoon from my side, everyone. My name is Pim Bonne. I'm an EU coordinator at the Flemish Department of Mobility and Public Works, and I'll be joined later on in the presentation by my colleague Kathleen Huet on today's presentation on the new TEN-T network. First of all, I will start to give a bit of a policy overview and a short bit of history about the Trans-European Transport Network. We go back already pretty long at the foundation of the European Union, and in the Treaty of Rome in 1957, there were already references to a common European transport policy. These were, however, rather vague references about the need to have as little obstacles as possible for trans-European transport, but there were no obligations put towards the member states. So it was more of a principle, but not very concrete. We had to wait until the Treaty of Maastricht in 1992 for the establishment of the trans-European networks. So the treaty established three kinds of trans-European networks: a transport network, an energy network, and a communications network. And within the Treaty of Maastricht, the establishment of these trans-European networks also implied obligations, financial obligations for the member states to upgrade the existing infrastructure and complete the network. So only as of 1992, there has been a clear focus on a cross-border transport network and member states not only focusing on transport infrastructure on their own territory. As a result of that, TEN-T guidelines were developed, and the first version was published in 1996. And consequently, they have been updated in 2004, 2013, and now recently in 2024. So basically, every 10 years, the TEN-T guidelines have been updated according to changes in policy, changes in transport infrastructure, and so on. The current framework is the Regulation 2024-1679, which was published in June this year, and you can find the whole text, which is pretty long, through the link in my presentation. Some general principles about this trans-European transport network. So it is a multimodal network, so all transport modes are included, and it starts from nodes. And these nodes can be urban nodes, big cities, seaports, and airports. And the inclusion, if you are a TEN-T node or not, is for the cities based on inhabitants, or being the biggest city in a NUTS 2 region, which for Belgium is the level of provinces. And for airports and seaports, the inclusion is based on passenger or freight turnover. So to be included as a city, one needs to have either more than 100,000 inhabitants or be the main node in a NUTS 2 region. For the airports and seaports, inclusion in the network means you have to handle at least 0.1% of the complete turnover in the European Union. It's a multimodal network as well, as I said, as it covers all relevant transport modes and contains the infrastructure for each of these modes, so rail, road, air, maritime, and inland navigation, and there are also specific provisions for freight terminals and urban mobility. The TEN-T network is also a multi-layered network with different time horizons for completion. So we have the core network, and here is the time horizon for completion 2030. The core network are basically the major transport axis connecting the nodes, the transport axis where we have the biggest transport flows of people and goods. And this core network is to be completed with the highest priority. So the deadline is within 5-6 years. Then we have the extended core network where the completion horizon is 2040. This contains merely sections on the road and the rail that have been added to the network with the latest revision this year. So it was not really fair to impose a completion deadline of 2030 for these infrastructure sections, but an intermediate deadline of 2040 was proposed. And then we have the comprehensive network, where the horizon for completion is 2050. And the comprehensive network aims to connect all regions in Europe to the core network. So it's basically the network feeding into the core network, ensuring cohesion and accessibility for all regions in the Union. There is a big focus on cross-border sections. As I said before, there was a TEN-T policy. Member states tended to focus mainly on their national transport networks and less on cross-border sections. These were often forgotten or didn't receive sufficient attention. So big focus on cross-border, and there are also mechanisms in place to facilitate cross-border cooperation. So there's European coordinators, European Commission, they can facilitate between two member states to realize a cross-border project, because there's often differences in permitting procedures, tendering procedures, realization of projects, so it's a bit more complicated. But these cross-border sections are crucial for the completion of the network and for ensuring smooth traffic of passengers and goods on the network. It's often said that the TEN-T network should facilitate a smooth and borderless travel from Helsinki to Lisbon. So we're not there yet, but we're getting pretty close, I would say. So the motto from the Commission for the revision of the TEN-T network is we go from a patchwork of national networks to a network, so one big European network with a focus on these cross-border sections, but also on removing missing links and bottlenecks. There's also big attention to interoperability. So telematic systems across borders, can they talk to each other? Or signaling systems, safety systems across border, can they talk to each other? Are they the same? So interoperability is also a big thing in the completion of the network, and which is very new on since the 2024 framework, is that there's a bigger focus on multimodal passenger hubs, where passengers can change from long distance transport to local and regional transport or urban transport, and also a bigger focus on the freight hubs, where the goods coming in from everywhere in the world are transshipped to move further on to the internal market in the Union. Another new thing in the 2024 framework is military mobility, and that won't be a surprise given the current geopolitical situation. And there's much more attention to the dual use of infrastructure, which means that infrastructure should be able to be used both by civilian transports and military transports. And also related to this, the TEN-T network was now also extended to include Ukraine and Moldova. The new TEN-T framework is also very much aligned with European Green Deal principles. So there's a bigger focus on what we call at European level the more sustainable modes, rail and inland waterway transport, and a smaller focus on road transport. And also more attention to climate resilience of the infrastructure network. There's also a strong link with the European regulation on alternative fuels infrastructure. So this is the framework that regulates the rollout of charging infrastructure, hydrogen refueling stations, and other alternative fuels infrastructure. What is now in the regulation itself? The regulation describes for each of the transport modes what are the components of the network. So roads, bridges, railroads, waterways, locks, all these kind of things are described as parts of the network. Then first of all, it describes also what are the transport infrastructure requirements for the comprehensive network, so with the Horizon 2050. So, and then it describes for the smaller part, which is a core network or the extended core network, it describes what are the requirements for this core network. So this is all about completion of infrastructure, for example, that certain access are turned into highways without level crossings, with separate lanes for traffic and so on. Then the regulation also for each transport mode defines the additional priorities, and the additional priorities are more the nice to haves. So these are not obligations, but these are priorities on the further rollout of telematics or the further removal of cross-border problems, bottlenecks, and so on. And in Annex 2 of the regulation, you will find a list of all the nodes that are part of the network. So that's a list of urban nodes, ports, airports, and railroad terminals. There's also a tool that the Commission is using for the implementation of the network, and that's the European Transport Corridors. That's the implementation network for the core network, the implementation instrument, I'm sorry. And these European Transport Corridors bring together the member state authorities, the regional authorities, urban node representatives, infrastructure managers, in one corridor, and they monitor the completion of the core network. They discuss where action is needed on cross-border sections, on bottlenecks. They discuss aspects of military mobility. So they follow up together under the guidance of a coordinator, and that's someone with a profile of a former minister or a former member of European Parliament. They meet every half a year to follow up how the completion of the network is going. And Belgium is located on 2 of these European transport corridors. And here you will see a map. We are located on the red corridor, which is the North Sea Baltic corridor, which starts at the ports of Belgium, Netherlands, Germany, and then goes all the way to Poland, the Baltic states, up to Finland, and to the other side all the way to Ukraine. And Belgium is also located on the Green Corridor, which is the North Sea Rhine-Mediterranean corridor. This corridor starts in Ireland and then goes from Belgium and France down south over Luxembourg, Germany, Switzerland, to the Mediterranean ports in France and Italy. The regulation also contains specific maps of the infrastructure which is part of the network, and you can find these maps at the end of the regulation. And I'm just showing you the examples of the maps for the Benelux countries. So there's a map for inland waterways and ports, and as you may notice, all major waterways, and that's the waterways that are SEMT class 4 and higher, they're all part of the TEN-T network. There's also several seaports and inland ports and inland terminals spread over the country, which are part of the TEN-T network. On roads, you will see that all of the main highways in Belgium are part of the TEN-T network. The ones in bold are the ones belonging to the core network, and the finer lines are the ones belonging to the comprehensive network. So basically all of the highways and ring roads around the big cities in Belgium are part of the road network in TEN-T. Then there's a map for the rail network for passengers, where you will notice that it's mainly the purple lines, which is the high-speed network, which currently connects Belgium with France, the Netherlands, Germany, and used to connect us with, well, it connects us still with the UK, but they're not part of the Union anymore. And then there's some main lines, which is basically the line from Ostende to Brussels and from Brussels to Arlon, which are part of the core network for passengers. Then the smaller lines are the lines which belong to the comprehensive network for passengers. And then last but not least is a map for rail transport, but for rail freight transport and rail freight terminals. And here you will also see the most important freight routes that are used in Belgium for goods transport. You can check the exact alignment of the network at another moment, if you wish, through the public TEN-Tech GIS viewer. So there's a link and everyone can just check the network. There you can choose a layer on infrastructure for each mode, or you can select a corridor. So you can check everything again in TEN-Tech. What's in there now for the urban nodes? Because urban nodes have greatly extended. The number of urban nodes has greatly extended in the new framework. And the articles 40, 41, and 42 of the regulation deal with the requirements for urban nodes. Before the revision now in 2024, there were only two urban nodes in Belgium, and that was Brussels and Antwerp. But as I explained now, there's a new approach, and urban nodes above 100,000 inhabitants or the main node of a NUTS 2 region were included in the network. So currently we have 11 urban nodes in Belgium: Antwerp, Arlon, Brugge, Brussels, Charleroi, Ghent, Hasselt, Leuven, Liège, Namur, and Ottigny-Louvain-la-Neuve. What are the requirements for these 11 urban nodes? There's several of them. There are requirements on the provision of charging infrastructure and alternative fuels infrastructure, as I explained, in accordance with the AFI regulation on the rollout of this alternative fuels infrastructure. It's about the provision of charging infrastructure for heavy-duty vehicles and buses, and looking into the feasibility of having a hydrogen refueling station near the urban node. By the end of 2027, these 11 TEN-T urban nodes should also provide the European Commission with their Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, or SUMP. And also, again, by the end of 2027, provide certain indicators on urban mobility. These indicators are still being defined. So for the moment, we don't know yet which indicators the European Commission will inquire. But as of 2027, these should be provided annually to the European Commission. Then by the end of 2030, in each urban node, there should be a multimodal passenger hub, which is mainly the main railway station, connected to a bus station, connected to shared mobility solutions. So one hub where people can change from longer distance transport to local regional transport or shared mobility solutions. And then by 2040, based on a social cost benefit analysis, the development of at least one multimodal freight terminal should be looked at. These requirements are not solely the responsibility of the TEN-T urban nodes city administrations themselves. It all depends, of course, on who is managing the infrastructure. So several of the requirements will be, for example, for Infrabel, or for the lane, or for the road infrastructure managers. So we're currently in the process of looking into what does it mean and who is involved and whose responsibility is this. If there are requirements which are absolutely unable to comply with, there is a possibility to ask for an exemption, but only in duly justified cases. This overview sums it up. So in 2025, there's some very small things like the nomination of a contact point for the urban nodes, the development of a SUMP support program, the development of this list of urban mobility indicators. And then as of 27, we have the provision of the SUMPs and the urban mobility data. 2030, the development of the passenger hubs in these cities, and 2040, the development of freight terminals in these urban nodes. There's not only obligations, but there's also opportunities. And these 11 TEN-T urban nodes have now also access to the CEF Transport Funding Program, where they can participate in competitive calls for EU funding. And currently, there is already one relevant call open, and that's a priority for studies on the development of multimodal passenger hubs in the TEN-T urban nodes. And the link is there in the presentation. And I can say that there are already Belgian proposals under development for EU funding under this priority. I would now like to pass on to my colleague Kathleen for some slides on how we will implement now this TEN-T policy for urban nodes in Belgium and in Flanders. Kathleen.
Thank you, Pim. Good afternoon. My name is Kathleen Huet, and the TEN-T regulation requires member states to designate a national SUMP contact point. For Belgium, this is me, and Xanta Langendries is my backup. Our main task is to ensure the information flow between the European transport corridors and relevant partners in Belgium, that being the 3 regions and the 11 TEN-T urban nodes. For your interest, in the whole of Europe, there are 431 urban nodes. Can take the next one. As you already heard, urban nodes should collect data on urban mobility indicators, the so-called SUMI, Sustainable Urban Mobility Indicators. There will be three categories of indicators: road safety, sustainability, and accessibility. As Pim already said, at this time the exact indicators are not yet known, but there is a European working group on SUMI, and in this working group, each of the three regions of Belgium are represented by a designated expert. Something more about the SUMP, the Sustainable, thank you, the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan that each urban node should adopt. A SUMP is a strategic plan for the mobility needs of people and businesses in cities and their surroundings. Surroundings meaning that a SUMP should cover the entire functional urban area, so not only the city or the urban node, but also the commuting zone. In Flanders, this Huet, or functional urban area, is considered to be the vervoerregio, the mobility region. We have 15 mobility regions in Flanders, and last year all of these mobility regions adopted a regional mobility plan. So the 5 Flemish urban nodes will submit these regional mobility plans to the European Commission as SUMP. On the next slide, you can see the 15 vervoerregio's mobility regions in Flanders, and you recognize the 5 urban nodes with their surroundings or VUA. From left to the right, Brugge, Ghent, Antwerpen, Leuven, and Limburg containing Hasselt as urban nodes. That's it.
Okay. Thank you, Kathleen. So far the general TEN-T framework and what exactly it means for these 11 defined TEN-T urban nodes. But now I'll have 2 more slides on what it means exactly for other cities and municipalities in Belgium. How are they connected to the TEN-T policy and the TEN-T network? And so first of all, other cities and municipalities, apart from the 11 mentioned before, they are not affected by the requirements of the TEN-T regulation. So there's no obligations for these cities and municipalities to comply with. Of course, these cities and municipalities can be confronted with the TEN-T network as there's a highway or a railway or a waterway passing over their territory. They may be confronted with works on the network by one of the infrastructure managers. So of course, they're not completely out of the blue. They are connected, but they don't have obligations in terms of the transport policy. Cities and municipalities, as Kathleen explained, can also contribute to the SUMPs, which have to be developed on the functional urban area level. So also the cities and municipalities in the commuting zone are part of this SUMP, and so those cities and municipalities can contribute to that. Of course, cities and municipalities can also have a role to play as permitting authorities for several categories of infrastructure projects on the TEN-T network. And then I think of freight terminals being developed along waterways, safe and secure truck parkings, rest areas, the rollout of alternative fuels infrastructure. So a lot of these infrastructure projects where cities and municipalities will have to issue a building or environmental permit are realized in the framework of the TEN-T policy. And also for these projects that are being developed on the TEN-T network, they also need to demonstrate that there is local political support for the project and that it is integrated in local mobility and spatial development plans. So this is a short listing of what other cities and municipalities, how they are being confronted with TEN-T policy, TEN-T infrastructure, and so on. I would like to end my presentation with a few slides on financing and support in general on TEN-T. So basically the Connecting Europe facility is the funding instrument connected to the TEN-T networks. So there's a chapter on transport, on energy, and on digital infrastructure. And in the current European budgeting period, there's about 13 billion euros which could be distributed for transport infrastructure projects in non-cohesion countries. So basically the Western European countries. Concerns mainly subsidies, but also blending, which is a combination of a subsidy with private financing. And the Connecting Europe facility is open both for public and private project promoters. So it's not only for governments and their infrastructure managers, but also private promoters building rest areas, safe and secure truck parkings, and so on, port terminals. They can apply for funding. Currently, the last calls under the CEF transport are open, but most of the budget has been allocated already in 21, 22, and 23. So we're now in a call of 960 million euros still available, and after that, all of the money will be allocated. The Flemish Department of Mobility and Public Works is a national contact point for CEF transport in Flanders. And people with questions on CEF funding can come to us, and we will advise project promoters on that. We will support them throughout the application process. We'll do a quality control before the project is submitted. And we also provide the required member state validation document for projects which are carried out in Flanders. We did have quite a good return in Flanders for the projects that were supported and monitored by my ministry. And in the previous European program period between 2014 and 2020, we had a return of 3.46% of all available CEF transport funds to Flemish projects. And that's about, I think, 420 million euros that we managed to flow back to Flemish infrastructure projects. And in the current programming period, we have just less than 2% of the available transport funds going to Flemish infrastructure projects. And I think it's about 230 million euros we received so far. Here are some examples of projects that have received funding in the past. Left up are the bridges over the Albert Canal. We received quite some funding to lift or replace all of the bridges over the Albert Canal to allow 4 layers of containers on the inland navigation there. Right up is the construction of the new lock in Harelbeke, which was concluded, I think, about 2 or 3 years ago, which is part of the bigger Seine-Skelt project, which connects our port, Antwerp, and North Sea Port to Paris. Right under is the opening of an LNG refueling station in Heverlee, near Leuven, which also received CEF funding in the framework of the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Policy. And then left under is one of the last subsidies we received in the framework of military mobility. We received funding to replace bridges in Damme, which are crucial for both the passage of civilian and military heavy transports. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for your attention. I hope I could make it a bit more clear what is the TEN-T network, what is the TEN-T policy, and what's in there for cities and municipalities. If you have more questions, you can always contact me and my colleague Kathleen. And I understood that after the presentation of Thomas, there's room for question and answers as well. Thank you.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Pim. Very insightful, and Kathleen, of course, as well. A very insightful summary, I think, of quite complex information. Thank you very much. So now let's have a look at Wallonia, if that's okay for everyone. Thomas, could you maybe share your presentation and maybe introduce yourself in a few sentences as well?
Of course. I will just explain the plan of my presentation, then I will take some time to present myself and my administration.
Sure.
Hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar on the Trans-European Network of Transport and its impact on local mobility policy. Thank you also to Pim, who made a very extensive presentation of the TEN-T universe and that already presented you several concepts, very important concepts. So my presentation will focus on the Walloon region, but its content is very derivative and can, in some extent, also applies to other region. So I plan on introducing you, and in this case, repeating a little bit what Pim just explained, the concept of the Trans-European Network of Transport and the regulation that supports the deployment of this network. I will give you information on financing opportunities to help member states to enforce this regulation. And then we will focus on describing the new element of one of the new elements of the latest TEN-T regulation revision, the addition of 9 new urban nodes in Belgium, and the opportunities and the obligation that accompany it. Finally, we will review together our sustainable urban mobility plan, already mentioned by Pim and Kathleen, SUMS, will be adopted in urban nodes. So first, oops, doesn't work. First, I would like to take 1 minute to present myself and my administration. So I work for the Public Service of Wallonia in the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. My unit is in charge of international and European policies and projects. Our main activities are to monitor international policy on mobility and infrastructure, to coordinate those policies and promote the emergence of co-financing opportunities, collaborate in the development of the Walloon strategy for mobility, then monitor various European programs and funds, just like Pim mentioned, like the CEF, and operationalize the allocation of those funds. So here you have the contact of the head of our unit and the email contact if you have any question on opportunities related to European projects. So I will be repeating some element that Pim already told us, but maybe in a more rapid, concise way. What is the TEN-T network of transport? So first, TEN-T is an initiative by the European Union to develop smooth and efficient transport network across Europe. The network includes roads, railways, inland waterways, maritime shipping routes, ports, airports, and terminals. And now, with the new regulation, a number of new urban nodes. So the TEN-T network is structured into 3 layers, depending on the priority of the completion of each layer. So the core network, which is the most critical, the extended core network with additional important connection, and the comprehensive network that connects all the region. So you see that there is a completion date. Pim already mentioned them. The most important one is, of course, the realization of the core network for 2030. The general objective is to eliminate barriers and create a single European transport area. So, what are the objectives of TEN-T? So, The member states are primarily responsible for the design, the financing, and the construction of infrastructure on their respective network. But the role of the European Union, excuse me, is to act as a catalyst for the development of those networks and aim to facilitate the connection between all modes of transport and transport nodes. Here you have the legal basis that is giving us the guidelines for the development of the network is known as the TEN-T regulation and was revised in June 2024. Here on the presentation, you have a direct link. I think the link will be in French, but a link to this regulation. A new regulation that was revised recently to adapt to current challenges like the greening of transport, the European Green Deal, and the geopolitical situation after the war of aggression of Russia who invaded the Ukraine. Now, concerning the financing part, so the main source of financing on the TEN-T network come from national budget, but also from European fundings. The main source of the fundings from Europe are under the form of grants, subsidies, grants that are typically awarded through call of proposal, where applicants submit project ideas that have to be aligned with the specific EU priorities, subsidies. Also, subsidies managed by national or regional authorities. So those funds can support all kinds of initiatives. And then third, loans, guarantee, and equity. So it's a financial assistance to support EU policy and programs. The major program that financed the deployment of TEN-T network is the Connecting Europe Facility, also known as CEF, that focuses on energy, transport, and digital infrastructure. But there is all other programs like Horizon Europe that support research and innovation, the European Regional Development Fund that aim at regional and urban development, or the Cohesion Fund, but no, sorry, not the Cohesion Fund does not concern us. It's an error. All those projects can contribute to improve transport and mobility. So now, Pim mentioned several maps designing the network over over Belgium. So I wanted maybe to do with you a little demonstration of the tool that will allow you to locate your city or municipality on the TEN-T network. So by locating yourself, you will be in a position to identify if you could take advantage of maybe financial opportunity via CEF throughout different programs that are mentioned here. So let's try to open the TEN-Tech Map Viewer because it's not always a really easy tool to use. So if you click on the link, you will have a map of Europe, and then you simply have to zoom on the region that you are interested in. And here I will stay on over Belgium, and I have several options on the side. And have from those options first, maybe the most important one is to see the corridors that are going through Belgium. Like Pim said, Belgium is concerned by two corridors, the North Sea Baltic and the North Sea Rhine Mediterranean. So it becomes rapidly hard to read, but here you have the two corridors that Pim mentioned, the green one and the red one, overlapping sometimes one over each other. So then you have options to click on layers and have the network with every mean of transport and type of nodes. So within the regulation 2024, they identified every part of the network. So if you are interested in roads, just as we saw before with PIM map, you will have the bold road of the roads of the core network in bold, and in lighter lines the comprehensive network. Every nodes or network part of the transport mode can be activated, and if you want to identify infrastructure near your city, you can click on the node and see that there is the Liège airport, and that is located on the core network. So you can always try to locate your own city on this network and see if you are maybe concerned by if some roads are going through your city. Finally, you have other option to have to check, for example, also the AFIF eligibility map to check if you are eligible for to take part into the alternative fuel infrastructure facility who's financing alternative fuel stations. So first I'm gonna click this off. So I have a clear map, and here you have it's not really readable, but you can check depending on the call you are in right now. You can check if the roads are available. Here you can see that everything is green, meaning that there is no more roads eligible. But if you click on here to change the power of the station, you have more opportunity. You see that there is more opportunities. I think we did a little visit of the tool. So I invite you to visit I was not on the good to visit the every filters and check your own city in the TenTech map viewer. Okay, so let's get back to the presentation now. Now that we've talked about TEN-T, maybe we are going on the subject of the impact of the new TEN-T revision, the impact on urban nodes. So the Annex 5 of the TEN-T regulation defines major guidelines for sustainable urban mobility planning. And those guidelines are applicable for the new urban nodes and the area surrounding them. As Pim mentioned also earlier, the functional urban area. So first, let's take a look at the map, but rapidly. How are located the map, the urban nodes? 5 in Wallonia, 5 in Flanders, and 1 for Brussels. I'm not gonna repeat but all the list, but those cities were designated as urban nodes because they had a population over 1,000 inhabitants, or sometimes because they were the provincial capital of provinces that had no city with a population over 100,000 inhabitants. So the result is that, for example, in Wallonia, very small cities became urban nodes. So Autigny-Louvain-la-Neuve is an example, or Arlon. So from the introduction of those urban nodes created new opportunities within the CEF program, but also a series of obligations that are reflected in the Article 40, 41, 42 of the TEN-T regulation. So you can see here, there is opportunities on the left, already mentioned by Pim, but the development of study for multimodal hubs for passenger in urban nodes, the deployment of charging stations for alternative fuel in urban nodes. If you are interested to see those programs, you can either click on each individual programs or click on the page to get the CEF, the general page of the CEF transport code for project. So we talked about opportunities, but also a few obligations, and first obligation for 2027, the adoption of the urban sustainable urban mobility plan, so that we called SUMP, and the collection of urban mobility indicators, collection of sustainable urban mobility indicators that we call SUMI. Also covering the functional urban area of the urban node. In 2030, we have the development of a multinational multimodal hub for passenger, and 2040, the development of at least one multimodal hub for goods when it's possible. So to focus, let's focus on the obligation that is the most that is the closest to us, the adoption of SUMP and SUMI. So the administration, the regional administration will coordinate the adoption of SUMP and the organization and the collection of data for SUMI. But the administration will have to design a strategic plan that operate at multiple levels, because there is a lot of stakeholders involved. Involved are the authorities from municipalities, cities, region, and also at the federal level. The region will lead this work to ensure that there is a coherent division at the regional level. Now, if you are wondering how will your city, municipality will be impacted in the process of defining the sums, as you can see with the example of the SUMP of Charleroi on the right, the administration, the regional administration, has defined a functional urban area that will impact municipality around the urban node, and it's on the next page, and it's designed around the PCMN, that are the communal plans for mobility. Municipality outside of the FUR won't be directly impacted, but will eventually reap the benefits from the sustainable urban mobility plan. So here here on the slide, we insist on the importance of involving all stakeholders, so that the SUMP becomes everyone's responsibility, to synchronize the action of all participants to avoid wasted measure and double investment, and of course for this plan to work, to obtain the widest possible support base. So what are the main objective of the SUMP? So A sustainable urban mobility plan should primarily aim to improve accessibility for all users, including people with disabilities, reduced mobility, and that is within the functional urban area. It should enable high quality, safe, and sustainable low emission mobility throughout the same area. And it has to take into consideration the role of public transport and active mobility to be improved. In particular, this plan should support low and zero emission mobility and the implementation of urban transport system that contributes to the overall functioning of the TEN-T, or the objectives of the TEN-T. This includes developing infrastructure that allow the smooth flow and a low and zero emission the smooth flow of low and zero emission vehicles, multimodal passenger transport platform, and to facilitate the last mile connection within the urban, the functional urban area. Here on the presentation, you can click on this link to have an example of a sump, the sump of Charleroi that was recently finalized. So what the main characteristic of SUMP is that it should include a long-term strategy that is to be linked to with an already existing long-term strategy for the future development of transport and infrastructure and multimodal service. It should include an execution plan for the short-term implementation of the strategy. It should be part of an integrated approach to the sustainable development of urban area and be linked to land use and spatial planning policies in the urban areas. Both the long-term vision and the short-term implementation plan should also address all the financial perspective for the SUMP. Now, another aspect of the SUMP is that it must promote multimodal transport by the integration of different modes of transport. So the SUMP will adopt measures to facilitate accessible, smooth, and sustainable mobility. It includes action to increase the modal share of the most sustainable mode of transport. Public transport, shared mobility, active mobility, and if it's possible, inland waterway or maritime transport. It should also include action to promote low and zero emission mobility, in particular for example, the greening of the urban public fleet, to improve accessibility for all users and reduce congestion. Also, it should also enhance the road safety in accordance with the European Union safety standards, especially for vulnerable road users, including when it's applicable, the active mode users. Finally, the SUMP should consider the impact of the measures taken within the framework on traffic flows, both passenger and freight, on the Trans-European transport network. It should aim to ensure the best transit and the interconnection through and around the urban nodes, and particularly encouraging low and zero emission vehicles. It should also include action to reduce congestion, improve road safety, eliminate bottlenecks that are affecting the traffic flow on the network. Finally, we already mentioned the importance of the integrated approach to involve every stakeholders. So a high degree of cooperation, coordination, and consultation between the different level of governance and the competent authorities is necessary. Also, citizens, the civil society representatives, and the economic actors around the urban node. Finally, the SUMP should encompass objective and targets and indicator to support the current and future performance of the urban transport system. So it's really important that the implementation of SUMPs be monitored by using high performance indicators. So to conclude on this presentation, I wanted to give you maybe some interlocutors related to European policy that may be relevant for your city. You can always contact the international and European project unit following this link on the presentation. There is a national contact point for European policy following the second link, and maybe you can visit the Wallonie-Bruxelles International website, and in particular use the tool Walmeet that allows you to find financing opportunities and information in Wallonia with the third link. Finally, for all your questions about the sustainable urban mobility plans, I give you here the contact of Kathleen that already presented previously points on sustainable urban mobility plans. And for a contact for Wallonia, you have our national regional contact, and also the general mailbox to send every question. I hope it was clear and that it was useful for all of you. And I thank you for your time and the opportunity to meet you and present you this subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Really interesting and a nice demonstration of the tool as well, of the mapping tool. Really nice to have it that way. Thank you all for the presentations. I propose we go to the Q&A right now. I heard some pings during the presentation, so I believe some questions have been submitted in the chat. Elke, could you have a look at those?
Yes, there are two questions. Two questions in the chat. The first one is a general one, and it's asking about our cycling networks. Do they enter the scope of the CEF and the TEN-T network, or what is happening with the cycling networks at all? I think that Pim is already ready to answer that.
Yes. Well, when it comes to CEF transport funding, so the financing, cycling networks are indeed not in the scope as standalone projects. There's other financial instruments that are more suitable to finance cycling infrastructure, like ERDF, European Fund for Regional Development. We have also funded quite some cycling infrastructure in the recovery and resilience facility after the crisis. So CEF is mainly focusing on other infrastructure, but cycling infrastructure can be part of a bigger project that is funded. For example, when you want to develop your multimodal hub at a railway station or so on, you can of course also get funding for the cycling part of that project. But CEF is not meant for financing whole cycling networks through Europe.
Okay, thank you. That was clear, very clear. The second question is more specific to you, Thomas, I think. What infrastructure in Wallonia has been supported by the TEN-T funding?
Yes, I didn't plan this on my presentation, but the clearest example of a project that was funded throughout the CEF in Wallonia is, of course, the Seine-Escaut project on the inland waterways that is focused on the modal shift from road to waterways, and aims at having an impact on emission. Historically, I don't have any other big project that went through CEF. Maybe if Pim has some example in mind from Wallonia, I know that also on the side of the Canal Albert, there was some projects, but I'm sorry, I don't know them exactly.
And I think, Thomas, the locks of Saint-Neuville.
Yes, of course. I forgot them. Thank you.
Okay, clear. Thank you. Thank you for the answers. Thank you for the questions also. I see there's one question popping up in the chats again. So let me read out loud. Focus was also on cross-border interactions, but the border between West Flanders and France is not included in the network.
I'm a bit surprised by that, because all borders are included, and for example, the Saint-Scheldt project is on the border between West Flanders, Hainaut, and Haute-France. So no, projects on all borders are taken into account. So we have this big waterway project, but there's even also projects on rail or on safe and secure truck parkings in that area. So no, all borders are included.
Okay, clear. It was a question with a question mark, so clear. That's an answer. Thank you, Pim.
I think we received also one question in advance in writing.
Yes. Yeah. I've summarized those and put them on a slide. Maybe if there are no more questions from the audience, I'll just share my screen so everyone can see the questions that were submitted through the registration form. So no more questions here. I'll just share my screen again. I've written them down here. So maybe Elke, you could read out the first question as well, if you like.
Yep, I can see it. Financing is offered through project financing. Why not financing based on the functioning as a network?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think that's a bit of philosophy of CEF Transport. They work with competitive calls for all modes. All member states can participate, all modes of transport, or all infrastructure managers can participate. If it's based on the function of the network, then I think there might be an imbalance in the division of the funding, because most of the biggest transport flows are here in Western Europe, going from our ports to the south of France and Italy and to Germany. So I think it's considered by European legislature to be more fair to work with competitive calls, allowing all member states to participate for their projects.
Sounds fair indeed. Thank you. The next one are two questions in one question. What are consequences for member states if they do not complete certain links of the network in time? And will the core network be fully completed by 2030?
Well, we cannot say that for now, but as I explained when I talked about European transport corridors, there is a monitoring system in place. So the European Commission, through these coordinators, is following up on the completion of the network. There are some key performance indicators being recorded, and these are translated into maps to see where the network is already in place and where it is not. What will happen if the network is not in place? The regulation has a procedure where the Commission can make recommendations to a member state when it looks like they will not be able to fulfill the requirements. So there is a kind of mediation procedure of the Commission trying to help out the member state concerned to complete the network. So I don't think the Commission is already thinking about infraction procedures and make the member states pay fines for that. It's more like of helping them to complete the network because it's in the interest of the whole Europe that it's completed. So there is monitoring, and it will be more with a gentle hand that member states will be helped to finalize completion.
Okay, thank you. I think the third question is also related to this monitoring. Will the networks be periodically revised based on changing socio-demographic factors? So it's also a bit of a monitoring question. Think of new member states, but also changes in population growth, economic growth.
Well, indeed, there's also it's also foreseen in the regulation that nodes can be added or removed from the network with population growth or reduction, also for the seaports and the airports. So we don't have to wait for a major revision to do that. So it's just due if something changes and a city has to be added, it will be added. New member states might take a bit more time. I think then there will be a major revision, or there will be maps developed for these new member states to be added to the network. And the regulation foresees now a major revision of the network and the state of play in 2033. So within 9 years. So as I said, about every 10 years, there's a major revision of the network.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. I saw that there's another question in the chat. So if that's fine for you, Martin, I will read it out loud.
Sure.
I think it's also a question to Thomas. Are there any links to be made between the Mobipole network in Wallonia and the opportunities for multimodal hubs for passengers in urban nodes?
Yes. I think we can say that the Mobipole initiative is of course related to those opportunities. There was in the past and financing throughout the program Interreg of those Mobipole. Those existing Mobipoles will certainly be taken into account on the designing of the sump of each urban nodes, and for those multimodal hubs that are not yet existing in the urban nodes, maybe the Mobipone can be a model, but I cannot assure you that this.
Okay,
Thank
but
you.
the relation is clear. Yeah, it will be used. Yes. It's not lost. Okay, good. Thank you for that.
And I can associate to that for Flanders. So we also have Mobi points, and they're called hop-in points in Flanders. So we also see them as part of the development of these multimodal hubs for passengers in the urban nodes. So I think we're on the same line here with the colleagues in Wallonia.
Okay, good to know. Thank you, Pim, for the addition. I think that's it for questions, Martin.
Okay, if there are no more questions from the audience, then I just want to thank everybody for joining and participating in this webinar here today. Next week, I'll send you all the presentations and recording of this webinar so you can share it with colleagues or with partners and disseminate the information even further. Should you have any questions about this, you can feel free to contact Pim, Thomas, Kathleen, or reach out to Elkin and me. If you have questions specifically about cvnet.be, feel free to reach out as well. We always like municipalities, cities and towns to talk to us about the topics they want to discuss, about the European projects, updates, funding they want to receive more information about. So if there's anything you'd like to discuss, feel free to reach out. And hopefully we'll see each other again during future cvnet.be events, of course. So have a nice day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Have a nice
Bye-bye.
day.